I've been a big fan of Suda51 and his games for a pretty long while now. He has a certain style that I don't often see in other video games, and it wasn't until recently, when I really started looking into Suda51, did I realize that there were other game series done in a similar manner. Not in the narrative sense, it's a bit more nebulous than that. There's something about the games in these series that make each one feel a little familiar, despite there not being a direct connection to a previous or future game. I did more research into this, and to my surprise, there was actually a term for this style of series that's relatively new. So, pull up a chair and join me as we explore and discuss, what is a thematic series? A thematic series is defined as a series that doesn't follow the same characters or story. Instead, it follows the same themes in each entry into the series. All entries in a thematic series are made by the same creators for the purpose of an interlocking series, and can be played or seen out of order due to there being no real continuity between them. If the series shares any characters at all, they'll usually be a cameo or a side character that might not affect the story in a big way. It's different from a spiritual successor since each installment is done by the same creators. However, a thematic series can contain a spiritual successor if the creators lack the rights to make a sequel. At times, it can even be the reason a series becomes a thematic series. In some respects, it's similar to an anthology series, which is a series that can present each entry with different themes, genres, even creators or writers, in addition to also having a different story and cast. The term thematic series can be seen as more like an extension to the anthology series. To give an example, one that I think is a particularly excellent example of an anthology series is The Twilight Zone. Now, I know this isn't a video game, but bear with me here. Created by Rod Serlings, The Twilight Zone originally aired from 1959 to 1964. It ran for 5 seasons, during which Rod Serlings wrote the majority of the scripts and helped produce several others. Each episode focused on a different cast, characters, stories, and even genres. They would occasionally have an unexpected or macabre ending. Even as the series changed with each episode, there would always be a couple of constants. One being Rod Serlings as a narrator, and the other being an exploration of human nature and social commentary. Twilight Zone centered its episodes around some facet of human nature, but each episode would take a look at a different aspect. Even if an episode had a similar theme to a previous one, the story is taken in a different direction. So yeah, entries in an anthology series can be tied together with something in common, and in fact, a lot of anthology series have a general theme they're centered around. But the key word here is general. While The Twilight Zone has a theme, that theme is so broad that it feels like it changes focus with every story it tells. Unlike a thematic series which puts more of a focus on a specific central theme for each of its entries. With that being said, the line between them can get pretty blurred at times. Before I move on, I'd like to recommend The Twilight Zone to anyone who hasn't seen it. Despite being made in 1959, it's entertaining, it's wonderfully written and produced, and spans a wide range of topics that are still pretty relevant today. Okay, as I said before, the line can get a bit blurred at times. The Silent Hill series is a pretty good example of this. If we just look at the games made by Team Silent, the internal team at Konami, then there's only 4 games we have to look at. In Silent Hill 1, Harry Mason is searching for his lost daughter. Silent Hill 2 has James Sunderland searching for his deceased wife, who recently sent him a letter. Silent Hill 3, Heather Mason is haunted by the cult of Silent Hill, and lastly, Silent Hill 4, which originally wasn't going to be a Silent Hill game. Henry Townshend is trapped in his apartment room because the door is chained up from the inside. There are themes that are present in each game, but each game seems to have a bigger focus on a different specific theme. And every game except 2 has the cult and Silent Hill be the cause that started the events in the game to happen in some way. The cult's presence is still felt to some extent in Silent Hill 2, but they're not directly involved in the events of the game. Then you have Silent Hill 1 and 3 being directly related to each other, while 2 and 4 are mostly separate from the other games. In my opinion, the Silent Hill series doesn't quite fit as an anthology series or a thematic series. It has elements of them, but not enough to qualify them for either one. There's probably an argument to be made for either case, but let's move on for now to some games that are definitively a thematic series. I'm not going to talk about all the games that are considered a thematic series, just quickly go through some which I think are good examples. Final Fantasy is a long-running series that's pretty well known. Every game takes place in its own world and mythos. Every game in the main numbered series is an RPG of some kind. The stories in the game tend to emphasize exploring the characters themselves and their motivations more than just defeating the main antagonist to save the world, although the antagonist usually plays a pretty big role in the main character's motivations. There's usually recurring elements in the game like Cid, chocobos, certain monsters, summons, and crystals. Crystals are in every Final Fantasy in some form. They have varying degrees of importance from game to game, but they're always there in some fashion. The Final Fantasy games have recurring themes like the never-ending fight between light and darkness, good and evil, and conflicts between technology and nature. Quintet's Heaven and Earth series spans 3 or 4 games depending on who you ask. Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, Terranigma are all on the Super Nintendo, and, debated among fans, the Grand Stream Saga for the PlayStation 1. Every game in the series revolves around restoring a ruined planet and defeating the evil that caused the destruction. They're RPGs, usually with a slight sim element to them. Unlocking new areas of the game also tends to coincide with restoring parts of the town that the main character interacts with. These games contain themes about the human soul, our connection to nature, death, and resurrection. The Soulsborne games, as they've come to be known as, are a pretty good example of becoming a thematic series because the developers didn't have the rights to make a sequel. The game Demon's Souls was owned by Sony. Then FromSoft was approached by Namco Bandai to make a game like Demon's Souls, so FromSoft made Dark Souls. And finally, Sony approached FromSoft again to make another exclusive game, Bloodborne. All the games in the series are similar in terms of game mechanics, storytelling, and world building. Their main themes are about the cyclical nature of those worlds, hope and futility, and the choice to perpetuate the cycle in some way or to attempt to end it. Far Cry, the first-person adventure shooter games. This series tends to also have some elements of surviving in the wilderness by hunting and crafting. Each game in the series focuses on a different location and wilderness. Upgrades are usually given from side quests or hunting certain animals, and for the mainline games, they have the shared theme of being in a lawless frontier where the values and laws of a current society are not necessary, as well as men becoming monsters, which is kind of just an extension of being in a lawless frontier. Fallout is a post-apocalyptic RPG series taking place in America after a nuclear event wiped out most life on Earth. Each game takes place in or near a different major town in America. The central theme seen throughout the games, one of which is well known by fans of the series, is that war doesn't change. For humanity, it is a fact of life and we are doomed to violence because we'll always find a reason to wage war on each other. Other themes that can be found in these games are survival and recreating the world in the image of the old. The Xeno series spans 3 different series with Xenogears, Xenosaga, and Xenoblade Chronicles. This is another example of a thematic series caused by spiritual successors, at least in the case of Xenogears to Xenosaga. This is an interesting series in that each series has multiple games included in a particular series, and it has a lot of different themes that are shared between each series. These themes are things like the meaning of life, humanity and how we treat others, religion, and fighting fate. I'm simplifying these a bit, but there's a lot of stuff going on in these games actually. Taking place in Japan, usually in a post-apocalyptic Tokyo, is Shin Megami Tensei, the JRPG series that spawned the very popular Persona series. Known to be a particularly difficult and unforgiving JRPG series, the mainline SMT games tend to have figures from various mythologies and religions as potential party members. Morality-based decisions that are aligned with either chaos or law and has multiple endings. With themes such as free will, agency in the world, nature versus nurture, and it takes ideologies like law and chaos to extremes and explores them. SMT is a weird series in that it focuses less on the main characters and instead puts more of an emphasis on the ideologies presented in the game and their effects on the world. This is juxtaposed by the Persona series, whose themes put more of a focus on the relationships we form, the different masks we wear in our daily life, collective unconsciousness, and the courage to face the world. If the Twilight Zone is seen as one of the defining examples of what an anthology series can be, then I would call Suda51's Kill the Past series as a defining example of what a thematic series can be. Every game in the series has a different name as opposed to some of the other examples shown. Starting with the Moonlight Syndrome, the next game in the series is The Silver Case, then Flower, Sun, and Rain, Killer 7, and finally, No More Heroes. The reason I think that this series is a defining example of a thematic series is that the main characters are different in every game, although some of them have some kind of relation to a previous main character. There are cameos from other games in the series, not necessarily just previous installments. They're set in the same world according to Suda51, but the premises and characters are different enough that the stories created by them all feel like they take place in their own separate world. Nearly every game changes genres. The only constants in Suda's games are the main theme of the series, which can sound pretty abstract at first, and imagery that appears in a good amount of his games, including some that are not considered part of the Kill the Past series. The namesake of the series, Kill the Past, is the main theme of this series, and it's about characters facing their past in order to move towards the future. Characters usually must confront these things head-on mentally or in combination with a physical representation. Some of the imagery that occurs in multiple games in the series are televisions, severed heads, and the moon. This imagery is important because the ideas behind them persist throughout the series. To kind of summarize why I think Kill the Past is a good example of a thematic series, it's because it's the closest to the basic definition of a thematic series. Everything changes except the main theme and some imagery, and it doesn't really lose itself individually or as a whole. To me, the genius behind Suda51's Kill the Past is that despite the theme being the same, each game presents a completely different story thanks to how he portrays the characters and the situations being different from one game to another. Keeping what I've talked about in mind, there's not too many games that are considered to be a thematic series, all things considered. Which is a shame because as a consumer of gaming media, it's really fun. When the games aren't exactly explicit about if they are a thematic series, then if someone is interested, they can go through those games and find those connections between them. And if not, they can still be enjoyed as standalone titles. Sometimes references to past games or characters are included in future games and can give a glance into what came of that character if the player knows about the previous titles. It's a type of series that can be enjoyed in many different ways, and that's kind of what's so fun about it. As for developers, I have to assume that a thematic series is more challenging to do, but it's also more rewarding if done well. There's a sort of freedom that isn't exactly there in a standard series. They're not limited to the same story, characters, or heck, even genres. Like in Suda51's games, they go from adventure games to rail shooters to action games. A sequel to a game in this type of series also doesn't necessarily discredit it as a thematic series. As seen in the Xeno series, they have multiple titles per series, but the different series still have those core themes. So, a thematic series can be seen as an extension of an anthology series, with the major difference being that a thematic series is characterized by a strong central theme, and at least in the context of video games, being done by the same group. And it surprisingly makes a world of difference. Looking at some of the examples given, not every series needs to change every single thing, except the themes, for an entry to be valid. But looking at these examples definitely help in understanding what exactly is a thematic series. Alright, I think that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for sticking with me for this. Like I said at the beginning of this video, there's not a lot of information as this term is relatively new. Honestly, the only real source directly related to it was TV tropes. Alright guys, I'm gonna let you in on what I'll be working on next, but before that, I've got a couple questions for you. Are there any game series that you think should or shouldn't be considered a thematic series? Have you heard about this style of series before? Let me know in the comments. I'll leave a link to the list of games that are considered a thematic series in the description and comments below. On to the videos I'll be working on. My next review is going to be Devil May Cry 2, the HD version. I was actually going to review a different character action game before DMC 2, but with the HD release on PC being so close, I thought it would be better to review DMC 2 first. And the next What Is video I'm working on is actually going to be a complementary piece to this. It's going to be all about Suda51's Kill the Past series. If you want updates on what I'm doing, follow me on Twitter. I stream on Twitch every now and then, although my schedule at the moment is pretty erratic. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you later.